Hello, my wonderful, beautiful friends, guys. Welcome back to our /EntitledPeople, where some people genuinely believe the world revolves entirely around them for some reason. And today's episode gets ridiculous, guys. Karens are stealing disabled parking spots, demanding entire playgrounds get shut down for a photo shoot, one guy who thinks OP's horses should be public property for his kids, and one OP tells a tale about an unhinged neighbor who slashes a tire over a parking space. So yeah, sit back, relax, and prepare to lose a little more faith in humanity, guys. And remember, this voice should only be on the Dark Fluff YouTube channel, nowhere else. Okay. To begin, I smoke cigars, mostly cheap factory rejects, but an occasional good one too. I also don't smoke in my house or around other people, as I know a very select group of people enjoy that particular aroma. Also, one other point to note here, I drive my youngest to and from school, which is less than a mile away. That said, yesterday afternoon, I'm parked way outside school zone in a line to pick up kids, probably a block away in a residential neighborhood. I drive a big truck with a loud exhaust system. This story involves me, Karen, and the school principal. So as I've said, I'm in the line of vehicles with my engine off, listening to a good book on Audible, smoking the last bit of a good cigar. And for those who don't know, a cigar can be set down and refreshed if need be. Also, I never smoke on the school grounds, and I always have it out before my kid gets in the truck. It's my truck and no one else drives it, so I don't mind the smell of tobacco, and I have a bottle of Febreze I use every couple of days. Anyway, about 5 minutes later, I see a woman getting out of her car and she begins to approach me. I watch her walk up past the two vehicles behind me and she heads my way. The woman's got the typical Karen look, the hair, the clothes, way too much makeup, and the like. She comes right up to my window and she stands there looking at me. I of course roll my window down all the way, and I asked if she needs anything. Here's the dialogue as follows. Karen basically screams at me and says, "What the hell do you think you're doing?" I respond, "Excuse me?" Karen says, "You are smoking the pot." And yes, she called it the pot on school grounds. You should be ashamed of yourself. I just get defensive and I say, "What in the world are you talking about?" Karen says, "I can see it in your hand and smell it." I respond, "Well, obviously you can't smell it because this is a cigar." She says, "I don't think so. I'm calling the police." After some more screaming at me, I'll admit I did get a bit aggravated, and I said to Karen, "You know what? If you want to be a bitch and do that, knock yourself out." After her brain short circuits from being called a bitch, she tries to open my door, which is locked. She then tries to reach into my window and grab the cigar out of my mouth. Now, life has taught us from a very young age that fire is hot, and things that burn from fire are also hot, but physics never seems to be on the forefront of these morons. So Karen immediately burns her hand on the cigar and she jumps back screaming that I burnt her on purpose. I just start laughing because it was funny. She then tries to open my door again and I obliged by opening it as hard as I could, which then knocks her back, which made me laugh even more. It's at this point she screams at me, calling me an effing a-hole, that she's gonna report me for assault and she's gonna get me and my child kicked out of here. I just respond, "Yeah, whatever, Karen. Go back to your car before you have a heart attack." The woman walks back to her car, all the while yelling obscenities. I made sure to keep an eye on her in my rear view until we got closer to the school. Now, the school principal's always outside directing traffic between the parents and the school buses. He and I know each other because we've talked about football and other stuff on the regular. As I'm waiting to pull up to the place where you pick up your kid, I see the Karen park, get out, and head directly towards the principal. She made sure to walk by me and give me a dirty look, like it was supposed to intimidate me or something. Spoiler, it did not. She then proceeds to give the principal an earful. I couldn't quite hear what she said, but she made sure to be as dramatic as possible, probably telling him that I'm a drug addict and a child toucher, all of that stuff. The principal's doing his best to direct traffic and put up with her BS, and I assume he said something to placate her because she walked away all smug and again made sure to walk by me so I could see her grin on her face. I just smiled back and I shot her the bird, which was petty, but whatever. I then pull up and my kid gets in, and as I figured he would, the principal comes over to me. He says, "Did you really put a blunt of pot out on her hand and slam your door into her head?" I respond, "That is so stupid, I don't know where to start." First, she reaches into my vehicle and she tried to get the cigar out of my mouth and she burnt her own hand like the dumbass she is. Second, she tried to open my door not once but twice, so I did oblige her the second time. And third, if I'd opened the door as hard as I could into her head, she would have been knocked out on the road. The only thing I hurt was her ego. Tough crap. The principal then sighs and says, "That's about what I thought happened. Please do me a favor and don't retaliate. I don't need another headache." I let him know, "No worries, I'm just here to pick up my kid." I then got my kid and drove away, and that's it. I'll be picking him up again today, so hopefully there's no repeat of that nonsense. Listen, some people are just so bold, aren't they? Like for that Karen to try to grab OP's cigar out of their mouth and then blame OP for burning her and then making up a whole story about it is absolutely ridiculous, right? That said, a lot of people are split on this one, guys. And I know it's not an Am I the A-hole post, but a lot of people seem to be siding with Karen on this, so let me know your thoughts on this post. And if you thought that was outrageous, it only gets worse from here. So this was wild, and it's probably the most wild thing that's ever happened to me, if I'm being honest. I was picking up my disabled partner from the hospital, where he'd been for the last 2 weeks, from a life-threatening incident. His team told me not to worry about traveling up to the ward, that they would escort him down to the car with his stuff, if I grabbed a disabled spot. So I thought, great. I grab a disabled spot as close to the ward as possible. I put his disabled badge on display, and then waited. Not too long after I parked, I hear an "excuse me." So I pop my head out the window. A lady, about 50s, has pulled up behind me. The woman asked me to move as she has her disabled mother with her and she needs the space. I then explain I was waiting for my disabled partner and I needed this space. She then says, "Well, go wait somewhere else. I need this space. My mother is disabled. You're not." Now, I will admit, I could have handled this more gracefully, but instead, I just laughed and I told her to go away. I put my head back in the car and I turned my radio up, and this set her off. The woman gets out of her car and she walks up to my window. She starts yelling at me saying that I'm rude, unsympathetic, blah blah blah, and she accuses me of abusing a disabled badge. Not only that, she thinks my disabled badge is a fake and she won't hesitate to call cops on me. I didn't feel the need to explain my situation to this entitled lady. I'd had a truly awful 2 weeks, thinking I was gonna lose my partner. I don't know why I did it, I just knew it would set her off more, but I was over it. So with a smile, I said to Karen, "Smile," and then took her picture, and oh boy was that a mistake. She was absolutely flabbergasted. She then whips out a card that said "press" on it, and she told me that she worked for the press, and if I don't delete the picture, there would be severe legal action. By this point, I was locked in. I just told Karen, no, I'ma keep it, and then took another picture. That of course sends things into overdrive. The woman then starts screaming for security and the police at the top of her lungs. Everyone was looking. She then gave me a grin when security starts walking over and she says, "You're in real trouble now." Security came over and all they see is a very angry lady at my window and me in my car. She demanded they take my phone and delete the photos, and then demanded they tell me to move my car. The woman the whole time was waving her press card around like it was a cop badge or something. Security was confused. They take a look at me, look at the disabled badge, and then look at her. They then told her to leave as she was very clearly harassing me, and that I was doing nothing wrong by parking in a disabled bay, and I was allowed to take photos of someone harassing me. The woman's smug grin then turns into a shocked face. She ends up calling us all useless C-words, got back in her car, and left. By this time, my partner arrives being escorted by his nurse. We all had a good chuckle at the entitlement people have against young people with disabilities. You gotta love that, right? Using a press card to try to intimidate someone. I'm sure Karen's employer will be very impressed to know that she was doing that. And guys, you would think that a journalist of all people would be well aware that there is no privacy in public. And this person comments, the lady who was not disabled but had a disabled passenger complained that a non-disabled driver was driving around a disabled passenger. So this was a few years back, and every time I think of it, I still chuckle. I rented a small block of land just outside town to keep my horses on it. Horses weren't uncommon in the area, but there were also a lot of residential areas around. So sometimes I would turn up to my pasture and people would be there with their kids, petting my horses over the fence. It didn't bother me, as both my horses were pretty nice and polite to pet. One day, I was out there doing chores, weeding, cleaning, fixing the fence, normal house stuff. I had my headphones in and I'm working away when all of a sudden I hear shouting. I look over to the gate by the road and I can see a man and two young girls there, around 7 and 5 years old, beckoning me over. I walk over, assuming they want a pet and maybe feed a carrot to the horses. I say hello, and the first thing the guy says is, "My kids want to ride your horses. Let them on." Not even a "can my kids ride your horses?" Nope, the guy's basically so demanding. And for reference, my horses were ex-race horses who were still learning where the off button was. They are highly trained and they're also very highly strung. So safe to say, even if I wanted to let the kids ride the horses, these horses weren't child safe. I of course explained this to the man, and I don't have any of my riding gear with me as I hadn't planned on riding that day. The dad just rolls his eyes and he goes, "Well, it's not that hard, just plop them on the horse's back and lead them around." He says this as he's trying to open the gate to let his kids in. Lucky for me, I always keep the gate padlocked as it led to a busy road and I didn't want the horses getting out. I again explain that they can't ride my horses and he was better off looking up a riding school or a trail riding place if they really wanted to ride. At this point, he realized I wasn't budging, plus, my horses had walked off to the other side of the field behind a tree line, so they were out of sight. So he does what a lot of super entitled people do. The guy turns back towards the car while loudly saying, "Come on, girls, this mean, ugly lady doesn't think you deserve to ride the horses today." Hearing that, his kids start bawling their eyes out. He loads them up in the car before flipping me off, swearing at me, and then taking off down the road. What a great parent that was, hey? Like, instead of trying to teach the kiddos that you can't always have what you want, let's instead throw a fit, make it so it's all OP's fault, causing the kids to cry, and then bash OP for absolutely no reason. Some people truly suck. And this next person shares a short story about an influencer Karen. And it goes just how you probably think it goes. So this happened last week. I took my son to a farm park, and after you've been through the animals, there's a play area with a climbing frame, slide, swings, all that stuff. It was a pretty busy day, so about 30 kids or so playing on the frame and slide. Enter the entitled Karen with a baby less than 6 months old. She's got her arms full of fancy scarves, artificial flowers, and a proper camera. We all watch as she keeps trying to put her baby at the bottom of the slide, and she's getting more and more annoyed that the kids keep going down it. So she approaches us parents, who are stood off to the side doing small talk, and she doesn't even ask. She marches up to us and she says, I'm an influencer and I need all your kids to stop playing for a bit so I can get these photos on the slide. Thanks. She then walks away like we were all going to hop to it. Obviously, she gets told no, that it's a play area, not a photo shoot. She then storms away from us, and instead, she starts shouting at the kids who come to the top of the slide. And she actually calls my son rude and inconsiderate for asking her politely if he can come down the slide, please. Now, if that wasn't bad enough, she then takes one of her scarves and she starts tying it across the slide to stop kids coming down. She's getting angrier and angrier, and eventually, she shouts out loud, "Get your effing kids out of the way. This is my photo shoot." This is when one of the other parents went to find a park manager. Me and one of the other dads try to calmly talk to Karen, explaining that our kids are playing and it's not fair to try to stop them for her photo shoot. There's plenty of other beautiful spots in the farm park where she can go for photos. Eventually, the manager does show up. He ends up telling the woman that she's creating a health and safety hazard, and he asks her to leave the farm completely. We all hear her shouting and swearing all the way to the car park, and apparently she's suing for discrimination. What a fun morning that was. So I just came inside from this confrontation. Although, apparently, it started months ago. I just didn't know it. I moved to this neighborhood about a year and a half ago. It was bigger than my old place, so I wanted a few pieces of furniture, and I also wanted to swap out a few pieces. I'm too cheap to buy new for the most part, so I do upcycle and refinish most of my furniture. I do this mostly in my garage, but any spraying I do in the front yard on the mulch. Most of the neighbors had stopped at some point to welcome me or talk about my projects, and a few even asked if I took orders. I told them I do at a pretty low cost because I don't do professional quality, but it would have to wait a bit as I wanted to finish my personal projects first. One of the neighbors who asked was the neighbor lady across the street. When I gave her my answer, she sort of sniffed and said, "Fine," in a snarky kind of way, but this was almost a year ago. Well, a few months ago was the yearly large trash pickup, where you can put almost anything on the curb and the city will take it to the dump for you. It's also a great time to pick up new pieces. So that said, the neighbor lady had a pile of trashed items out. But as I was working in the garage, I see her lugging a console table to the curb. It looked beat up, but not broken, and it was one of the pieces I was actually looking for. So I head over, and it was pretty beat up as suspected, and the finish was scratched to heck. A pet had also chewed one of the legs, but it was a solid piece, so I asked if I could have it. The woman said of course, so I got my dolly and I stashed it in my garage. It sat in my garage for a few months, but last weekend I decided to work on it. Usually, I sand down and refinish most pieces, but after assessing the condition of the wood, I decided I was actually just gonna paint this piece, as patching the damage would be way too visible through a stain. I striped and sanded the piece down and fixed the damage. Today, I got out and I painted it in the front yard. It's a navy color and I'm happy with how it's gonna turn out. It was beautiful. Just as I was finishing putting away all the tools and the paint, the neighbor lady marches across the street. I thought she would come to admire it, as most people like seeing their old trash transformed. But instead, she says, "Listen, I've decided I don't want to give you this table, so I'm gonna have to come take it back when it's done drying." I just tell her, "No, you gave it to me, so it's mine, and I've put a fair amount of time and money to refinish it." She then whines and says, "But it's mine, you stole it from me and I want it back. Don't make me call the police." I just let her know, no, it's now mine. If you want it back, it'll be $150. Cue the shock and gasp. She says, but it's trash now, you ruined it. I thought you were gonna refinish it. I respond, then why do you want it back if it's trash? Plus, I like it like this. Any other finishing would have taken too long and cost way too much. And this is when she says, fine, if you want to keep it, give me $200 for it so I can buy a new one. I respond, no, you said I could take it from your trash pile. I even asked before taking it, and you told me I could. It's mine now. And this is when the Karen says, fine, well, I'll just come and take it while you sleep. To which I respond, I'd like to see you try. I then grabbed the leg of the table and proceeded to drag it into my garage. Karen did reach out to stop me, but she recoiled once she realized it was still wet. I pulled it inside and I waved at her with my now paint-covered hand as the door closed. Now I'll admit, it was a bit petty and my hand was covered in paint, so I will have to redo the leg, but it was well worth it to see the look on her face. And thinking back as I type this, I think it might have been her plan all along, to get me to take it, to refinish it, and then demand it back. Normally, I would have charged like $30 to $40 to refinish something like that. But because she tried to trick me, the price more than tripled and she ends up with nothing. She still is my neighbor, and I'm sure I'll have more fun with her in the future. Also, the cops never did come. Yeah, probably because she knew she didn't have a leg to stand on. And guys, the top comment of this post says, too bad it's something you really wanted because my petty butt would have demolished the piece and then brought it to her just like she asked. And Opie does share a picture of the table for all who are curious. It actually looks pretty darn good, in my opinion. And if you thought that neighbor was bad, it's nothing compared to these next ones, who resort to vandalism when they don't get what they want. So this happened a couple of months ago, and I thought I'd share it with you guys. This involves my entitled neighbor and my one awesome neighbor. Here's some context. Where I live, houses don't typically have driveways. If you have a parking garage in your house, the street parking in front of it is considered yours as well, and not legal for someone else to park on without your permission. If you don't have a garage though, that street parking space is considered public, and anyone has the right to park on it anytime. The only instance where it's not legal to leave your car in a public space is if you're using it to abandon the vehicle. Example, leaving it there for a ridiculously long amount of time without moving it. That said, on to the story. I used to live in a small apartment complex. There were 6 apartments distributed between 2 floors, and none of them had a garage. I didn't have a car until my boyfriend moved in, so I never really paid attention to parking spaces. When he moved in, he starts leaving his car in the front of the apartments on the very legal first-come, first-served spaces. Well, 2 of the downstairs neighbors seemed to believe that since we were living upstairs, we were stealing their parking spaces because they were in front of the apartments and they should have them for themselves. Now, I'm not sure how they wanted us to park in the air. We'd had that discussion with them multiple times, and we told them to get a government permit to make it exclusive and rightfully theirs, and we would stop parking there. And those permits are crazy expensive. They didn't get them, so we kept parking there. One night, we get out, get in the car, and realize that one tire has been slashed. It was really weird, but we just changed it without adding 2 and 2 together. The next day, my awesome neighbor tells us that police officers had attended a report of an abandoned car, our car. Apparently, my stupid neighbor thought it would be really clever to slash our car tire to make the car look abandoned and then report it for being abandoned. This way, the police would come and tow our car, freeing up the space for him to park and costing us a lot of money in the process. When we looked up the report, the guy had said we hadn't moved the car in months. We had moved it at least 3 times a week. Since awesome neighbor saw the officers inspecting our car, he went down to talk with them and explain that the car belonged to us. that we had it in constant use and the police report was fake. The most frustrating part about this is my entitled neighbor would come with multiple trashed cars that barely moved all the time, and the guy would take up 5, 6, or 7 street parking spaces at a time. So the guy understood the concept of public parking. He just believed that everyone should give up their parking spots to him. We did try talking to him after the incident, and the guy was way too much of a coward to face us. Instead, he sent his wife, who told us that we need to have some more empathy for him. Anyways, we've now moved to a place with assigned parking, and so far, no entitled idiots around. When I was a property shepherd for banks that foreclosed on properties, I was often asked to see if the occupants would accept money in exchange for surrendering the property in clean, intact condition and skipping the eviction. I had nothing to do with the foreclosure or eviction, and they used me because the lawyers charged hundreds of dollars an hour for that kind of thing. They prepared the offer, I presented it, and I presented it. If they said yes, the bank would send me a check. I inspected the house, and if it was clean and intact, they would hand over the check. Also, here's an important note. There was an eviction clock running. If I didn't report that they complied with the agreement, the eviction would proceed. They didn't stop that process unless I was successful, so I was helpless to grant extra time to move out beyond the agreement says be out by the 14th. That said, I was dealing with a couple in a 4,000 square foot house. They had been fighting the foreclosures, then fighting the eviction, and the bank and lawyers were sick of them. I delivered the offer, $3,500 to be out in 2 weeks. It was explicitly clear that I was not from the bank. I was not from the lawyer's office. They showed up at my office anyways and tried to convince us to sell them the house. The house which was not for sale, which they couldn't afford or they wouldn't be facing eviction, the house which wasn't ours. They didn't like any of those truths, and they said we'd better start checking under our car before starting it up, and stormed out. They wanted the money, and I always did what little I could to help people make the deadline. I always offered to come by a few days early and point out what needed to be clean. Normal wear and tear, no problem. Stained carpet, this isn't a security deposit, so unless it was fresh, intentional, I didn't care. Missing fixtures though, that's a problem. Unswept floor, also a problem. Bags of rotting food in the garbage, that's a problem. You get the picture. I went over for pre-inspection, not even close, so I point out what needed to happen. They asked if they could have the check now to hire the cleaners, and they would totally have it ready in time. Being ugly and not stupid, I declined, and I said I would see them on the date they agreed to. I show up on the date, and they hadn't cleaned up anything since my previous visit. They demand the check anyways. And let me tell you, they worked hard to come up with excuses. They said they were tired after threatening to murder me with a car bomb, that they needed the money for the down payment on another house, and won't I please, please, please do them a favor, that they'll do anything for the check except clean the damn place. So I marked them as non-compliant and left, returning the check to the lawyer's office. A week later, the lawyer's office told me I was free to take possession of the house and start my processes. There was still lots of trash, grime everywhere, and so many missing light fixtures. Best of all, they had taken all the towel racks and the toilet paper holders, basically ripping them straight out of the wall along with significant chunks of drywall. They sure taught me a lesson by damaging a house that wasn't mine. And for skipping at best 3 hours of cleaning, they lost out on $3,500, even though they deserve that money for being, quote, stressed. You know, it is honestly baffling how some people are, right? And with the way that OP was describing them, it's not surprising that they were in the position they were in. But yeah, imagine losing out on $3,500 because you were too lazy to do a bit of cleaning. But hey, that's r/entitled people for you. Guys, if you enjoyed today's stories, hit that thumbs up, and if you're not subscribed, consider subscribing so you don't miss these crazy, crazy stories. And if you missed the last episode on the channel, it's an r/malicious compliance episode, where OP obeys their horrible Karen boss, and it backfires so hard on them. It's such a wild episode, so go check it out if you haven't, and myself and Stevie Boy will see you guys in the next one. We love you.